When I was a child, I was kidnapped from my basement and taken to a place that I still struggle to accurately describe to this day. I think this is an opportunity to recount my experience as truthfully as possible and hope that you can accept it openly. It happened about 20 years ago. I was 8 years old then, with 2 siblings. My older sister Dennis was 10, and my younger brother Haywee was 5. We were a typical American family. My parents were very happy together, and we all shared a home in an old neighborhood still styled from the 90s. My childhood was very joyful until one point when everything changed. My sister and I created a strange phenomenon that could be called a haunting in the closet of our shared playroom. The dolls would gather in that closet, where we had decorated it as a theater with small seats for Barbie dolls. We began to feel the strangeness and drama rise when the first strange event happened, interrupting our peacefully ongoing performance. My sister wrote the script for this performance, and I just had to follow along. The tension rose as the story reached the point where Woody from Toy Story was possessed by a demon, stood up by itself in a sitting position, flew into the air, and turned to look directly at the audience, causing chaos among the Barbie dolls. The Barbies began an exorcism ritual, chanting the name Satan to expel him from Woody's body. As he convulsed like having a seizure against the backdrop of the stage, we snapped back to reality when the theater suddenly lost power for a few seconds and the lights began flickering uncontrollably. Dennis and I looked at each other and screamed, hugging each other desperately. Then we quickly calmed down. It was our mother, standing at the doorway, flicking the light switch, saying she had been calling us downstairs for about 5 minutes, but we hadn't answered. She said we couldn't get so engrossed in these games uncontrollably, that it was time to brush our teeth and go to bed. Hand in hand, Dennis and I ran to our mother and hid behind her, creating a barrier between us and something that had just crawled down the basement during the blackout. One of the scariest feelings of my childhood was the fear that monsters and demons would jump out and grab me at any moment whenever I was climbing the stairs to my bedroom. And that night, that feeling returned more strongly than ever. Honestly, part of my memory has fallen into oblivion. I'm not sure about the order of events, but I remember the hole in the wall, appearing shortly after the Woody possession incident in the theater. Dennis and I wrote another story and reenacted it in the closet theater. A strange, creepy hole had been there all along. It wasn't until recently that I understood its significance. Howie was actually the first to discover the hole. I came home from school, and my mother told me to call Howie up from the basement. Going down there, I looked around and saw Howie curled up in a corner a few meters from the foot of the stairs. He was kneeling on the ground, his hands on the floor, and one ear pressed to the ground, as if searching for something under a cupboard. Even though there was no cupboard in front of him, just a wall. I didn't find this very strange. Howie was only 5 years old and had a rather quirky personality, so I called his name loudly to tell him to go upstairs. My mother heard and reminded me from the dining room, saying I should call my brother properly instead of just standing there and yelling. Rolling my eyes in annoyance, I went over to Howie, who still hadn't realized I was standing behind him. I put my hand on his back, and he jumped, startled. I asked what he was looking at, and he began to sit up, still kneeling. He pointed to the hole in the corner of the wall. Its size was not large, fitting just in the palm of my hand. Inside it was pitch black, somehow even darker than black. Something about it made me feel nauseous. I asked Howie what was in there. He calmly replied that there was a very funny man in there, hiding behind the wall. My stomach, already upset, churned, and I nearly vomited when I heard that answer. I'm sure an adult hearing that would immediately think it was just a child's prank, but at that time I was also just a child, so I instantly believed him. Someone was hiding behind the wall, and the moment Howie said that became the most haunting thing for me ever. Every cell in my body wanted to scream and run out of there. I grabbed Howie's hand. I could hear him saying something, but I couldn't understand it as my mind was too chaotic. Like an animal, I ran upstairs, dragging poor Howie behind me, slamming the basement door shut, and running to my mother, still holding Howie's hand. I started telling my mother about the man in the wall in the basement. My poor mother was completely confused. I had been fine a few minutes ago, and she had been down to the basement to do laundry several times that day without noticing anything unusual. Eventually, I managed to hold back my tears to explain to her what I saw. Howie had done, and he had talked about someone in the wall. She laughed and explained that it was impossible because it was an unfinished basement. She explained to me that outside all the walls were bricks, cement, and earth. The wall for our room was wood and drywall, with only a small gap in between, certainly not enough for an average person to hide in. She tried to reassure me by going down to the basement. As soon as my mother headed towards the basement door, I started crying again. Seeing that it was no use, she made me a snack and told me to watch cartoons with Howie and Dennis. I began to relax until my father came home. We ate, and my mother told my father about the hole in the wall downstairs. My father, being a contractor, was quite confident in fixing it. He used a moisture meter to ensure nothing caused the hole when water was removed. He guessed one of us had kicked the wall and didn't want to be found out. Dad patched up the drywall like new. With a reassuring kiss on the forehead, he told me he had covered it up and thoroughly checked there was no one down there. That night I slept soundly, and over the next few days, the uneasy feeling in the basement subsided a bit. I still refused to go down there alone, but Dennis and I almost always played together, so it rarely caused any issues. Until one day, Dennis had to go to the bathroom. I wanted to go up with her, but we were making a candy cake, and she wanted me to stay to watch over it and ensure it didn't burn. I felt extremely anxious and told her we could unplug the oven until we came back. Dennis convinced me, and eventually I had to stay to watch the cake while she went upstairs, leaving a heavy silence in the playroom. I tried to keep my mind busy, reading the cake instructions on the box, then fiddling with a random Barbie doll on the shelf. A feeling like I was being watched suddenly entered my consciousness. I tried to ignore it as my heart started beating faster, and my discomfort grew. I tried to focus more on my Barbie doll, running the useless plastic comb through its tangled hair, wondering what was taking Dennis so long. Behind me was a sound like a soft click or a knock. I froze. The cake was still baking. My eyes widened. I was sure I hadn't heard my sister coming down the stairs, and Haywire wasn't even home. It came from the closet. Here is a brief description of the closet. It was unfinished, lined with a particle board. It was about 6 feet wide and 3 feet deep. We had play clothes and some winter clothes hung up for storage. Below were some stacked boxes, and the other half of the closet was a jumble of toys and stuffed animals. It had only been about a week since we cleared it out to make a doll theater, but it was starting to fill up again. I was truly shocked and wanted to run, but the closet and door were on the same wall, so I had to run closer to the closet to leave. That scared me. The sound continued from behind me, and as if bewitched, I felt my head turning to see what was making the noise. When I saw the closet, it took a moment for my eyes to stop spinning and find the source of the knocking. My mind processed what I was seeing, and I screamed uncontrollably. My feet and calves had run off before I even realized I was moving. Fleeing up the stairs, screaming, I couldn't stop screaming as I looked back. In the playroom, emerging from beneath the pile of clothes and hanging coats, was a bony, blackened hand like a mummy's, clutching a Barbie high heel between its fingers and moving the shoe across the boxes. Haywire was right. Someone was in the wall. My dad and Dennis went down to check for me, but they couldn't find anyone. However, that night Dennis came into my room with her hands clasped behind her back and tears in her eyes. I asked her what was wrong, and without saying a word, she extended her left hand. It was a mint green Barbie shoe lying in her palm. I immediately felt very uneasy and asked her if it was a shoe from her jewelry box. She shook her head and extended her other hand to reveal an identical mint green shoe. Dennis explained that the second one was the one from her bedroom, while she had found the first one on the boxes in the closet in the basement. We were both extremely scared. Even though we had a lot of dolls, we only had one pair of mint green high heels, and I lost one during a road trip at a McDonald's in Georgia last year. It had caused a big argument between us because those heels matched Dennis's favorite doll dress perfectly, and she had kept the remaining shoe in her jewelry box as a memento. We sat there with the highly convincing evidence of supernatural phenomena that we couldn't rationalize. We couldn't even discuss it. Dennis stayed in bed with me that night, and we barely slept. We were so scared. After that, we avoided the basement at all costs. There was always a spooky feeling down there, but it quickly became too much for little girls who just wanted to play with dolls and have story time for their stuffed animals. We planned ahead for the toys we wanted to ask our parents to go down with us so we could grab the necessary toys for the day, and retreat back to the safety upstairs. My mother loved tidiness and did not appreciate messy bedrooms because of our toys, so that indulgence didn't last long. We were allowed to keep a neatly arranged collection of toys upstairs, but the rest had to be stored in the playroom. Dennis and I were still so afraid of the basement that we decided to stop playing with most of our toys. We did other activities together, reading, doing gymnastics in the yard, or watching cartoons. I had successfully avoided the basement and never went down there alone since I saw that hand. I barely went down there at all, even with someone accompanying me. That changed on a cold November morning. My mother was very busy because both Dennis and Haywire were seriously ill. She had been running around caring for them all night, and that morning had to carry Haywire into a cool bath to try to lower his fever. My mother was on the phone with the doctor in the bathroom. I could hear the gratitude and relief in her voice when she said we could bring Hawi in early to see the doctor. Calling me into the bathroom, she explained that she knew I was afraid of the closet downstairs, but she had to watch Haywire and needed me to go down to the basement to get a coat out of the closet. My initial reaction was to hesitate and protest. My mother tried to encourage me, calling me a brave child. Trying to be steady at the top of the stairs, I clung to the courage my mother had instilled in me, but with each step down I felt it gradually fade away. Halfway down the stairs, I noticed the hole again in the corner. Fighting against every instinct in my body, I tried to go down the stairs. It was still daytime, but it was very gloomy, so the entire basement had a dim light from the small windows around the ceiling. I didn't like how it made the darkness seem speckled with mystery. I pressed my back and hands against the railing as much as possible when I reached the bottom of the stairs, leaving myself as much space as possible from the hole while stepping into the playroom door. Taking a deep breath, I was determined to step into the room. I knew what I had to do. I knew exactly where their coats were. I just had to reach out, grab them off the hook, and run like crazy. Except when I got to the closet, I couldn't see anyone's coats. I froze, unsure what to do. I knew they were in there, hidden behind the toy pile, our winter coats. But I absolutely didn't want to reach in to find them. I tried to come up with plans, weighing my options, and realized the worst outcome was disappointing my mother. I cautiously reached into the closet, pulling each layer of clothes out of view. Feeling a bit bolder after not seeing that blackened hand appear, I carefully grasped my snow pants and was relieved to find my mother's coat sleeve underneath. Reaching for my mother's coat, I felt time slow down as I saw that hand suddenly thrust through the clothes, grabbing my wrist with surprising strength and firmness. Despite its appearance of being made of paper and dust, it was quite solid. Before I could cry out, I was pulled forcefully into the closet. I felt my feet brush against the boxes, and suddenly I was in a place in between, not between the closet and the wall, but what I thought was a place between dimensions. I felt uncomfortable being in that place. I didn't believe I should be in that dimension. My whole body felt like it was covered in a cold, gooey layer. I tried to breathe, but it felt like I could live without needing to breathe. Despite the physical discomfort, my fear quickly faded. My emotions shut down, and calmness took over. Gradually, my eyes adjusted to the darkness of this place, and lights began to appear throughout the darkness, like stars in the sky. The light nearest to me looked like a hole in the wall. With dreamy amazement, I realized it was the hole in the wall of our basement. The light was enough to illuminate the figure that had pulled me here, and it was exactly that, just a black human-shaped silhouette, with no features, not even eyes. It looked more like a shadow than an actual creature. In this realm, it was darker than its charcoal-like appearance I had seen before when it played with the doll shoe. Then I realized there was no gravity in this place, and I let myself float away. The shadow floated with me. Being here, I no longer cared about them much. Now they didn't seem scary anymore. I dreamily floated toward the nearest light above me and looked through the hole, suddenly seeing a scene somewhere in Asia. It looked like a sewing factory, women sitting in rows, hunched over buzzing sewing machines. A man walked around, yelling at them. Immediately, as soon as I saw this scene, I could feel the emotions of everyone in the room more vividly than my own. Strength, fear, suffering, determination, failure, hope all flooded into me at once, and I felt truly wonderful, the pure, unfiltered flow of human emotion. After a while, I let myself float toward the next light. This hole opened into a hospital room somewhere in the world. The people looked pale, and I couldn't understand what they were saying. I didn't need to understand the language to know what they were doing. A pregnant woman was about to give birth, her husband beside her, and doctors and nurses surrounded her. Below, I watched and felt everything in the room as a tiny life was brought into their world. The mother's exhaustion and pain encapsulated in uncontrollable joy, the intense stress and confidence of the staff as they rushed to monitor the baby and mother, the father's relief that his family was safe. The parents' absolute love as they watched their newborn child, the baby's confusion and pain as it couldn't comprehend the surprisingly bright and cold surroundings. Then, I moved from that scene to a new source of light. This one was much dimmer, a rather dark bedroom, but you could tell it was daytime from the light outside the window. A woman lay on the bed. I could hear her crying. More impressively, I could feel her sadness. And this was an ancient sadness, despair and pain like incense in the room. At that time, my young mind couldn't comprehend what was happening, and I continued to float away. My silent companion still followed closely. Thus I traveled through what I called the in-between dimension, witnessing and feeling an incredible range of human experiences. I saw the mundane and the glorious. I saw crimes and acts of violence that could bring the best detectives to their knees. But none of that seemed to bother me. Everything washed over me like dreams. The strength and clarity of the emotions I witnessed were tightly coupled with the dullness of my current reality, but it never brought satisfaction. I'm not sure how long I stayed here. Occasionally, other shadowy figures like my companion passed by. That was the only time they grabbed my wrist to stop my journey, waiting for the strangers to pass. Although those people were also very gentle with me. The holes sometimes opened into cracks or gaps in the walls or ceiling, sometimes through an object. Looking around a room, I could see my reflection in a mirror, observing through the eyes of a porcelain doll. After a while, I noticed a distinct sadness as I drifted through empty space, when not distracted by other people's lives. I raised my hand to my face and saw in the dim light that my fingers were starting to turn black like my companions. Someone I began to consider a friend. We shared a certain understanding, though we never spoke a word to each other. There was an intuitive logic about how this place worked, similar to how you understand what is true in a dream. What I understood was that I was becoming one of the shadow forms. If I stayed any longer, I would lose my humanity, following only the sweet nectar of other people's emotions, and my physical form would completely turn into a shadow. On some level, I understood that I didn't want to transform through the mist. I thought of my family and, for the first time, felt my own longing in this place. My companion just nodded and gently took my hand, leading me to a specific hole in the darkness. I looked into it and recognized the space. It was the bottom of our basement stairs. It felt like an eternity since I last saw it. I saw Hawaii come into view, lying on the ground, crouched as I had seen him long ago, pressing his face to the hole. I could hear him calling my name, saying he missed me, and was very sad that the man in the wall had taken me. Feeling Hawaii's pure sadness wash over me, I tried to call him, but I couldn't speak in this space. Looking at my companion, we nodded kindly to each other, and I extended my trembling hand toward my brother. I passed through as easily as I was pulled in. I could faintly sense Hawaii's excitement when he saw my hand. He grabbed it and helped me climb through, even though the gap was no larger than a mouse hole. I easily slipped through and found myself lying on top of Hawaii. He screamed and laughed loudly. I hugged Howie and started crying as the soothing feeling of the in-between dimension faded, and I felt like a lost, scared child just found by their family in a crowd. We raced up the stairs, ran through the kitchen, flew past the police officers in the living room, and straight into my parents' arms. That day with my parents, Dennis and Hawaii, was the best thing I ever experienced. Looking up, I noticed a bony finger reaching out and wiggling towards me through a small hole near the fireplace. I smiled softly. I knew my companion could feel my gratitude for reuniting with my family. The memories of the following days are very hazy. I was dehydrated and hypothermic when I was taken to the hospital. I lost my big toes on both feet and the tips of my middle fingers due to what doctors diagnosed as frostbite. If not, the police would have interrogated me for hours about where I had gone. I gritted my teeth and lied to them that I didn't know and couldn't remember. All I could remember was it being cold and very dark, and then suddenly I appeared in the basement. The police completely destroyed our basement searching for evidence of a secret prison they thought my parents had locked me in, or a pipe or abandoned well I might have fallen into. By the end of the day, they were more confused than ever and told me to just say I got lost and found my way home. A few days later, I could tell it really bothered some of the officers. They worried about a child abductor on the loose and that I was too scared to say anything. But even at my age, I was clear-headed enough to realize they would never believe the truth. Everyone believed Howie was still feverish and not lucid enough when he saw me crawl out of the hole in the wall. When I asked him about it a few years ago, he said the memory seemed like a dream. Dennis was the only one I told the story to until writing these lines. Although I don't doubt whether she believed me, I think my story worried her more than anything else. That she ever imagined would happen to me when I disappeared. She couldn't understand how I could be okay after witnessing those murders and tragedies. How could I handle my emotions after feeling those extremes? I also tried to explain to Dennis the goodness I felt in that place, about a baby being born or feeling the joy of a child jumping through a sprinkler, two elderly couples holding hands in a hospital room, feeling the love and warmth for each other. It was as bright as the sun. In the end, I think she might never understand. If it happened to her, she would find it hard to understand too. I moved past it quite quickly, but kept those experiences in my heart, using what I learned to become a kinder and more empathetic person. Since then, occasionally I glimpsed a charcoal black hand slipping out of a hole in the wall or a crack in the floor, waving at me or wiggling a few fingers. I smile and wave back, letting my love reach the friend who shared so much with me. I let them know that life is still very good.